And this is a sermon for the second Sunday of Epiphany. I am going to, as I did last week, have a dialogue between the various voices from the lectionary and the poems today. I've started putting a link to the lectionary readings on the website, on the text of this sermon. So you can go to that, and it's quite easy. And I'm going to also put a link to this poem by Lee called Have You Prayed? When the wind turns and asks in my Father's voice, have you prayed? I know three things. One, I'm never finished answering to the dead. Two, a man is four winds and three fires, and the four winds are his father's voice, his mother's voice. Or maybe he's seven winds and 10 fires. And the fires are seeing, hearing, touching, dreaming, thinking. Or is he the breath of God? When the wind turns traveler and asks in my Father's voice, have you prayed? I remember three things. One, a father's love is milk and sugar. 2/3 worry, 2/3 grief, and what's left over is trimmed and leavened to make the bread the dead and the living share. And patience, that's to endure the terrible leavening and kneading. And wisdom, that's my Father's face in sleep. When the wind asks, have you prayed? I know it's only me. Reminding myself a flower is one station between earth's wish and earth's rapture, and blood was fire, salt, and breath long before it quickened any wand or branch, any limb that woke speaking. It's just me. In the gowns of wind, or my Father through me asking, have you found your refuge yet? Asking, are you happy? Strange, a troubled father, a happy son, the wind with a voice, and me talking to no one. Lee has been described as mystical, or at least his poetry. I met him once. He reminded me of my own father in his extreme degree of introversion. He was very shy, at least until he found out I'm a minister. Then he was prepared to talk. You see, Lee's father was a doctor who became a minister, Presbyterian. His father had once been the personal physician to Mao Zedong before the family had to flee China. Long story short, and this biographical note of Lee has nothing to do with the larger sermon. Lee's poetry often features his father or the memory of his father or the father's voice in his head. His poems feature silence, long breaks between the lines, and they do not necessarily make rational sense in the same way that the beginning of the Gospel of John doesn't make sense. You know, in the beginning was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and on and on. By the way, one of the places Lee studied was SUNY Brockport, so we can call him a homeboy the way that 3 or 4 states claim Abe Lincoln. But all this about Lee is really just because I thought I might have to soften you up a little bit in case that poem left you scratching your head, which with me can make me grumpy sometimes. So here's the dialogue of poets and clarions from today. You've searched me out and known me, the psalmist says to God. You trace my journeys and my resting places, and you are acquainted with all my ways. How deep I find your thoughts, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I were to count them all, they would be more in number than the sand. To count them all, my lifespan would need to be like yours. So speak, beloved, Samuel finally says. Speak, because now, after a long time of dismissing your voice, of denying that you could actually be calling me, I'm listening. And now I can hear you. Have you prayed yet? God's voice writing upon the wind inquires. Remember, the poet writes, a father's love, by which he may mean God, is milk and sugar, 2/3 worry, 2/3 grief, and what's left over is trimmed and leavened to make the bread the dead and the living share. Well, then follow me, Jesus invites, and we will make this bread together and share this bread forever. And some claim over and over again they have seen angels ascending and descending up and down as if on an escalator from heaven upon this man Jesus, then and now and over and over and over again. Let's just rest with that for a moment, like the verses between Lee Young Lee. Now I'm hoping that what happened there, as you listen to me read the fantasy dialogue, is that you just could fall into it, just go with it and feel it. Feel it. Feel the poetic, maybe the mystical edge of the voices, and realize the softness of them. Because I worry that when we read the readings in church, one reading after another from ancient voices that we no longer hear, they feel hard, they feel square, as if justified margins with a defined edge. We listen, but not really, unless something within them snags our attention for a minute, and usually it's negative. But in dialogue, these poets and clarions quietly and sort of serenely can talk to each other. And when they do, their softness emerges. Even if and where they make no sense, sometimes arises out of the dialogue that makes sense. Maybe only in the way that the voice of memory of someone long dead makes sense, when it pops into our heads apropos of nothing. For me, it's like some Sunday, Grant Holly, an old friend of ours, appears in the singing. Or recently deceased Bunny Bell makes a comment in our thoughts, or Sue Sabin, or her husband Howard, or your own father, your own mother. They whisper something. That kind of softness I'm talking about. These are the strains upon which the voice of God speaks, and either we hear it or we don't. If we were Pentecostals, we could claim loud bangs of revelation and clanging songs of holy racking our bodies, incarnate in our bodies until we couldn't stand it anymore. But we're not Pentecostals. We're, at least in our tradition, liturgicals. I don't think that's a word, but liturgicals. We get our leavened holiness in words and songs, in words that are sung or spoken, in bread that is eaten and shared. It's weird, of course, but we kind of like it that way. Every once in a while, it's important to stop what we're doing and witness to it, which is what this sermon is really doing. We're trying to find the poetry of God's voice carried on the voices of others, the ancient poets and clarions, as well as a few modern ones. Like Samuel, we have to listen because the voice isn't who or what or where we thought it was. We have to go back again and again in disbelief before we can say to ourselves, oh, it wasn't who I thought it was. And then stop, and then open, and then listen. And that's what we do in worship. Stop, and open, and listen. Wait! We might say when the thin voice whispers through our lives like an unexpected breeze, and we finally hear it. Wait! Where? When did you get to know me? Where did you get to know me? Nathaniel wants to know. It feels a little creepy to him that this stranger he'd never met seems to know what he feels and what he thinks without ever saying it before. And we know that creepy, maybe compelling feeling too. We hear that wind or receive that memory or acknowledge that whisper that has us pegged when we didn't want to be pegged, when we preferred to be unknown even to ourselves. That niggling moment when we didn't want to be vulnerable, but some voice inside sees us for who we are and says so. You know that experience I'm talking about, don't you? Well, when we enter into dialogue like this with the readings, it can release some voices like bats scattered under the curtains. Up they come, and we feel or we hear or we think stuff we hadn't necessarily wanted to receive, but grudgingly appreciate. All of that's why worship in community. All of that is what liturgy can do for us. We come to it wanting solace only and not strength, wanting forgiveness only and not renewal. But all kinds of things come back to us in the sharing of the bread with the living and the dead. It isn't always what we want that comes back or what feels good, but that is its power. On the wind of the liturgy, memories and voices and a whole nest of stuff is awakened and shaken free. It seems so staid, so orderly, so controlled, when in fact it opens the Pandora's box of our own lives that God wants us to be contending with. In that sense, it's a quiet kind of Pentecostalism. Have you prayed? It may be that these kinds of readings and this kind of sermon sticks in your craw rather than soothes your soul. But that's what liturgy can do and should do. It may be that this format of speaking, of preaching, is disconcerting in its strangeness or in its in-between-the-lines logic or what may seem like a lack of logic. But that's what liturgy can do and should do. Have you prayed? If you're listening to this online, which I guess you are, out of context of liturgy, it may not have made any sense whatsoever. But then again, it may. In either case, thank you for being here, and peace be with you.